maybe a little bit about what you do for a living?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Luke Taylor. I'm currently in San Francisco, where the state of California and surrounding counties have had a shelter in place order for the last 2 weeks, which was just extended through to the beginning of May. Oh, we got a little bit of feedback going on. Okay, cool. I am the co-founder and CEO of Spark Prep Admissions Consulting, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more. And I'm very happy to be speaking with you all today.
Awesome.
Yay.
So happy to have you. So first of all, yeah, I would love to talk a little bit about Spark Prep, just to talk a little bit about your students. But do you want to say a little bit more about what Spark Prep does specifically, and maybe why you found it?
And again, I want to remind that it's always really interesting to see like the path of how we got to where we are. So maybe Luke, you just like tell us a little bit of like your story and yeah, you and education, and why are you doing what you're doing, and like all
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So this in some ways leads to how Kia and I know one another. I began education work in college. I went to Stanford and graduated in 2010. And I studied kind of a combination of theater and what we might call cultural studies. My major was called comparative studies in race and ethnicity. So I was always really interested in communication and human connection, and particularly began to focus myself on writing. And as I began tutoring and working with students, my focus was on essay development, and kind of naturally that progression led into admissions coaching, as some of my families and students who were working with me a long time asked me to kind of look over their college applications. So now we work with kind of a range of students doing everything related to American college admissions. So that will include things like test prep for the SATs and the ACTs, academic tutoring for pretty much every range of subject, math, science, English, literature, and humanities. And then kind of my area of focus, particularly where I work with students, is on application and strategy, and particularly essay writing. So Spark Prep calls itself a holistic admissions company. And what that means is we're really interested in how the college application process can help students develop themselves personally, can think about character development, deepening their values, clarifying their values, and then expressing those values through their essay writing process. So back kind of in the day when we started this work, I was really curious about how could the college application process be used as an opportunity to understand yourself better, to discover parts of yourself, to clarify what's important to you, rather than seeing it as a super stressful, kind of like anxious, pressure-filled experience. So we've been doing that for almost 10 years. And we work with students kind of across the United States, and then around Asia. So we have offices in Vietnam and in Singapore. So it's been a wild ride. I have a really wonderful team who I'm very, very grateful for. And I personally just adore working with students, working with young people who are figuring themselves out, who are transitioning, going through this like huge life transition out of high school into higher education, is just a real privilege and a treat.
Oh yeah, we resonate on so many levels. Of course, Q was right, because what we do, yeah, is we help. It's a language school, yeah, but like the language school is just on the facade. It's just because it's so easy to start there. But actually, it's like a school of making your dreams come true. Yeah, and like the language is just an excuse, because we're like, oh, you want to learn English? Why? And the person's like, well, you know, I want to like work in Spotify and live in the valley, or like whatever, or like travel the world. And then we go, okay, let's us like put together a team of teachers around you, so that we can actually like, we won't stop until we see you working in Spotify, or like you send us videos of like you traveling around the world. And so it's been, you know, it's I think the highest joy for the teacher to, you know, see how you are actually helping the person build this life that they want. Yeah. And it's been like my concern for so many, like for so for a lot of time when I was looking at like the test prep and all the standardized things, because like they are in many ways is the opposite of this, but I was feeling that we need to disrupt this thing. We need to make sure that at least even when they're doing this, like things that are just so formal and just like so self-serving and, so not about the human who is doing it, but about the institution and the procedure, etc. But at least we have to get the most out of it. And, so I'm super excited to hear that you guys are doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the hoops that you have to jump through in formalized education really don't honor the individual human. And there are more and more and more and more of them as you go through elementary school, middle school, and high school. And it's so easy to forget yourself as you're kind of going through the achievement checkbox syndrome. And so I think the job of companies like ours, and it sounds like yours, Fyodor, is to kind of like shift the conversation back towards the heart, back towards the human, and begin to open up a conversation and say, you have this opportunity as you're leaving high school to kind of reflect and see, okay, I've come this far, what's next and why? And that why question can lead super deeply and kind of forever. So we see that as like a jumping off point to the rest of your life, right? College is, as you say, it's kind of on the facade. I'm not ultimately concerned about college. I'm ultimately concerned about what role that plays in the broader trajectory of your life leading out into the future. My goal is to set students up to live a happy life, a good life, a fulfilling life. And everybody has a different rubric for what that looks like for them. And this moment in time seems like the right moment to ask those questions and for them to begin to take responsibility and ask those questions for themselves. And that's, a great joy, sometimes hard.
Absolutely, yeah. And this age is so magical and special and wonderful. This first, this pressure is still low enough so that you can try and experiment, but also you are now are an independent individual, and to be providing this universe of opportunities, and be showing, hey, look, what do you feel like doing? You can do this and this and this, and we'll provide you with these options, and help you navigate them. But at the same time, I feel like they are new people now, and they are the people of the future, and basically we can learn so much from these guys and about our businesses and about where how we should be developing. I watched this talk of Singularity University, the founder and someone who was interviewing him, and he was talking about how now the huge companies, they form startups within these companies. They hire young, cool minds to actually, and their only job is to disrupt this company and to create a product or something that will actually have to destroy the business. But then it is made within the business, so when time comes, the business just pivots. And I think this is what we should all be doing, enabling these young people to take charge and sharing what we can offer, but also learning from these guys.
Yeah, that has to be one of the jobs of education. I think at the heart of this is a question is, what is the purpose of education? What role does it play in the individual life and also broadly in society? And if the role of education is just to repeat knowledge that has already been known, I think we lose a lot of the value of it. And so to give students the power and the agency to ask those questions of themselves and to really drive the future of their own education is potentially really powerful. And I mean, that kind of has a major disrupting force, both in their own trajectory, but also I think in the education sphere.
Yeah. I'll drop you another one, just the last thing here before. I know you have questions, but I was
go for it.
Yeah, I was just watching the interview of Naval Ravikant and Joe Rogan, and I really love this little insight. Malcolm Gladwell and the outliers and the thing about 10,000 hours. Yeah. Well, the Naval says hey, if you're just doing for 10,000 hours, if you're doing the same thing, then guess what? You're not getting better. He's like, I want to shift it into 10,000 iterations where you do something, and each time you do it, you like reflect and think of what can be done better and like iterate, you know. And he's like, the people who iterate 10,000 times, like, this is like the new outliers.
I think about that in the context of essay writing, because at this point, if it's not 10,000 hours working on essays with students, it's pretty close. And I think what I have learned is that the more I do it, the less certain I feel about any particular formalism or method or mechanism at any given time. And Kia and I, before we jumped into this call, we're talking about kind of the present moment and being present. And I think in some ways that's the best job of educators, is just showing up and being present with students. We don't necessarily position ourselves as the authority that has the right answer all the time, but someone who in iterating over the course of 10,000 hours has potentially some experiences to draw from, that when I show up with the student can reflect back different options, right? If this is where you are, you might have these like 5, 6, 7 directions that you can choose from, and you can kind of filter those experiences to help focus them. But you know, we show up as partners, I think. And I think that for us works better as a pedagogical approach, rather than we're the teacher and we know the answer all the time and that there is a correct thing and you just got to do the correct thing. That's not a particularly interesting way to teach. But I think, Fyodor, to your point, for the teacher, you get so much out of it when you show up and you're present with the student and you say, how can I serve you, student? And then you have this reciprocal relationship, rather than a kind of a didactic one that's just unidirectional.
Yeah. You know, in like learning all the lessons that we are learning now, whenever I say something and I, make a statement, I always want to add like, to the best of my knowledge, as far as like as of now, and like always give this disclaimer that whatever opinion that I'm giving, this is, always like to up to this moment, right. And to the best of my knowledge, and like just being together in this space where we know that tomorrow we might have a better answer, but now let's have the best answer that we can possibly have right now, and let's share it. And I know that like by giving you this answer and by using my sensors to feel the reflection, that it's this is already a better answer. And like whatever you have to object or confirm, this is already like, this has already changed whatever I like brought to the table firsthand. Yeah. So like being in this constant dance, I think it's really beautiful. And I feel like it's charging, it's full of energy, like a lot of people ask like, wow, Fyodor, why are you so like, where do you get so much energy? And like to all of our teachers. But guess what? Because it's an exchange, it's not just we are like radiating energy. We are exchanging all the time, we are giving our best, and then we are receiving the best from the students and giving best. And so it's just like this. Yeah.
And that reminds me of, just to bring it all full circle, theater, which is where Kia and I know one another from. That's the foundation of good theater, is relationship, right? Relationship and being in the present moment. I think if there is a central tenet to acting, it's probably that is communication and relationship. And that's where I got that study from, kind of very much accidentally, and begin to translate that into education work. But just being present, developing a relationship, and communicating.
It's so beautiful. And I do a lot of things intuitively. I do it first, and then I kind of my heart feels first, and then I trust it and I do it. And then my head comes up with like, 10 reasons why I did it in the first place. And I'm still figuring out why in ELK, I would say like 30-40% of our teachers are actors. And this relationship between, acting and teaching, is still something that my like left brain has to catch up with and understand why is this the case. So maybe today's discussion will take us closer. And what do you have to say about that?
Fyodor, I'm so glad you made it to this call. I knew this would be fun. I feel so much the same way. I feel like that's why it's made sense to me that we're now teaching a little bit of improvisation to our students, because this idea of being present and active listening so that you're really listening to information being received genuinely instead of planning what you are going to say creates such a more fruitful collaboration. And I always feel like my best teaching days are days when I'm actually doing more listening than I am speaking, because it's true. Students generally, especially if they're a younger age, have a different experience of the world that might be a little bit freer than mine. So if I can engage with that, we always get something more interesting out of it than me saying, these are the rules of the world and this is how you succeed. And Luke, with that in mind, I have so many questions for you, but first, we had such an interesting conversation before we got on this call, Fyodor. Can we talk a little bit about your some of your students right now, where they're from and where they are currently?
Sure,
so,
yeah.
Teach a lot in, what was your list? In Vietnam, and was Singapore the other one? I forget what you said.
Yeah, Vietnam, Singapore, and the US. And then we have kind of that's where our offices are. And then we have students kind of scattered throughout the rest of Asia. But we were talking, a moment ago, Vietnam has recently closed its borders, and students who were, or rather they closed their airports, and students who were studying in the United States and trying to get back home, some of them have been stuck in transit. And so there's some students who are in San Francisco, and we've been in touch with them. There are a lot of students who are now in quarantine. So this is a pretty uncertain time, I think, for a lot of people. Particularly in the study abroad or the higher education fields. A lot of, right now, in the last week or 10 days is when college admissions decisions have been coming out in a deeply uncertain time, in a period of time where colleges have been shutting down and sending students back and asking them to leave campus. And then the SATs and the ACTs have been canceled. So the entire world of higher education has been fully upended, and students particularly who come to the United States, which is, I think it's over 1 million students a year, 300,000 alone from China, about 80,000 from Vietnam every year, are in a big question mark, in a big limbo state as this coronavirus begins to really pause every facet of society. So a lot of classes are moving online. Some education companies and schools are more equipped to do that or better prepared to do that than others. A lot of kind of schools are trying to find their footing. But to your question, we have 13 students who are living in one house in South San Francisco because they got stuck transiting from their home states to Vietnam when their flights were canceled, and 13 of them are trying to take online classes in one house at the same time, and their internet router is kind of being overloaded. And I'm like, it's a little bit beyond my scope of understanding, so I don't really know how to troubleshoot those.
Have them take class from one. It's definitely an opportunity for a really cool group class where they all together, in this call, where the teacher is sharing and then everyone is discussing. I think making this small classroom would be the first answer. I feel like this is giving us, when the old system is falling apart and the old system wasn't necessarily the best system, and who, if not us, know what the misfunctional things and issues of that system, how exciting it is to build an alternative and to MVP it, and to try it. And if this proves to be working, then maybe the new system will already has this as, its basic function. So I feel like for us, it's an amazing time. And I would be so happy to have more of the, kids that are actually, way smarter than a lot of adults and feel the situation in this new world and getting together and brainstorming. I don't know, by the way, that's the interesting new episode could be maybe to get together our international students, guys from Vietnam and from Singapore and from the US, and really have an open discussion about, the things that were not working for them in education, and using all of our, like, you know, what we know about computer games, what we know about TikTok, what we know about modern education, what we know as, you know, founders and CEOs of like new companies that make new educations. And like, I think that we can create like something very special.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a ripe time of opportunity, particularly as there's a lot of energy pent up in fear and anxiety and uncertainty, and a lot of like waiting and this feeling of kind of just wait, which I think a lot of people have been feeling for the last month or so and will continue to feel. And as much as you can kind of connect people with opportunity to have that creative outlet and connect them to what the next iteration of the world might be, and as participants, that can kind of restore an experience of engagement and hope, and that there is life continuing. It's not just like everybody pause while we figure this thing out, which it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah. We had Zoe from India, for example, yesterday, and she was talking about this devastating situation in India. But then one of our neighbors asked her, well, like, we hear a lot of bad news, but do you have something inspiring and wonderful to share? And she's like, yeah, all these migrant workers that are coming, there are people that are cooking food for them, and they carry, you know, the things that they carry for them, like as long as they have. And I think it was so beautiful, and it's so important to, you know, focus on the this inspiring, creative, you know, active response, rather than passive and pessimistic of just like having this is coming at us, but like and sharing. And then when I see that someone is, you know, cooking food for and like helping carry, I immediately start thinking, okay, but what can we do, you know, to also be this
Yeah, absolutely. Luke said that a lot of volunteers around San Francisco had been offering supplies to his students who were stuck out of Vietnam. Was it a distillery that gave them a whole bunch of
it was amazing. I posted on the internet. I said, because San Francisco's been out of toilet paper for a really long time. And I posted on the internet, hey, I need toilet paper for 18 students who are living in one house, and you know, you can do the math. They have 4 rolls of toilet paper left. And a friend of mine, actually another actor friend, her husband owns a brewery, but the brewery is closed. No one's going through the brewery. There's all these restaurants and there's no more foot traffic. And they were like, yeah, we have some that we're not using. I popped over, they just handed me a bag of, and that was within 4 or 5 hours. And there were many other iterations of that for groceries, for clothing, for individual like rooms for people to stay in, where people just were like, yeah, I have this. I can support. What do you need? That is, if there is a silver lining to all of this, it is the ways in which people immediately can reach out and say, this is what I can do in this moment. Do you need that? And I've seen a lot of examples of mutual aid, really outside of the normal systems that we might imagine being the ones where we would receive that. And that's beautiful. And if we can sustain that for the next many months, then this will...
it becomes a habit, and we can sustain it for the rest of our lives and for our society.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely put us in touch with our humanity in a very different way. We had Chrissy on Global Neighborhood a few days ago talking about zero waste. And I don't know if you have these, Luke, in San Francisco, but we have something called Buy Nothing groups. Do you know about them? It's like a Facebook group that are super localized, and you can just kind of post things that you need or have to give away.
Interesting.
So it's an effort to not buy anything, to just see if it already exists in your community, and
cool.
Therefore produce less waste. But they've also started posting, they've been really useful resources for people in the neighborhood who can't go to the grocery store, or for like the elderly who can't get out and do anything. It's been like a really localized way to have a direct impact on the world that feels like useful in this moment. So
yeah, I think we're being returned to, I like you guys use the word global village, but this idea of like a much smaller, more local, tight knit, like who in fact are your neighbors physically, immediately, because we live in a world where a lot of us don't know our actual neighbors.
Yeah, it's wild. So I hate to shift gears like this. This is such a fun conversation, but Luke, we have a lot of students who are trying to apply to schools abroad, and I was wondering if we could pick your brain a little bit about your actual area of expertise.
Absolutely.
So first of all, just from the students that you've communicated with the most, what are some, would you say, some major hurdles that they feel, especially people who are maybe second language English speakers, of getting into a dream or a target school in another country?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that requirements shift pretty dramatically from school to school. So you can talk, at least in the United States, which is my primary area of focus, the things you want to think about are standardized tests, SAT or ACT. You don't need to take both. An English language proficiency test, either we recommend the TOEFL usually, though a lot of schools are beginning to consider the Duolingo English test, which is pretty similar. You can take the IELTS. It's not required for a lot of American schools. It's more of a British focused test. And then transcripts and leadership, right? So within that sphere, a lot of schools will have different sets of requirements, but those are the main things that we're talking about. So I think that's number one, is like, what is required to get into a college? The other thing that you want to think about is that there are not necessarily these cutoffs where you have this GPA or this SAT score and therefore you get into this school. Most schools in the United States are practicing some version of what we call holistic admissions, where we're looking at the entire applicant profile. There are kind of ranges of SATs or averages of GPA scores that can give you a little bit of a benchmark idea, but it is not the kind of thing where, schools are ranked officially and one SAT score, meets a school's particular requirement. And that's a different framework than a lot of different countries use. And that requires a shift in understanding or a shift in orientation for a lot of students. Then I think the other thing is timeline. The majority of the work is going to happen in what corresponds to American grade 11 year. So there's 12 years and we graduate in grade 12. The applications primarily are due in the middle of your grade 12 year. And that means that all the preparation has to happen about a year before. So you're working on your grades and your transcript for high school. Obviously that doesn't need to change much, and you're doing as well as you can grades wise, but then really test prep and essay writing and any kind of like activities or leadership really need to be thought about in advance. And then the applications are submitted at the earliest in November of the application year is the early round, and then the regular round starts on January 1st. So those are the major like logistical things. I think other components, our letters of recommendation, are really important. Those need to come from academic teachers who can really comment on your intellectual strengths, but also your contribution to the school community. American education is very collaborative and very community focused, which is why, why we practice holistic admissions, because we're looking at each application in the context of the class that we're trying to put together. So when we admit students for our future class, we can't have 100% of our students be economic majors who are president of their school. We need some diversity. We need people who are going to study histories, people who are going to study the social sciences, people who are going to study English, people who are going to study physics, people who play the trombone, people who are actors, people who are, and many different iterations of that, which is why when people say, what do I need to do to get into college? There's not actually a cookie cutter response, because a lot of it has to do with what is the true expression of your values and your commitments, and how have you investigated those commitments over time and cultivated a level of excellence in a variety of different areas in your life. So it's not about everybody has to be president of their student council or everybody has to be an economics major. It has to be what's interesting to you genuinely. And for a lot of people, that requires kind of a deep dive into their interests. So that's a little bit of a tangent here, but it's important to realize that schools are looking to develop a class. They are not looking for everybody to study business, economics, computer science, and STEM. They are looking because we have this thing called liberal arts education in the United States, which has to do with critical thinking and interdisciplinary investigations of topics. We want to have a history major, a physics major, an engineering major, all living together and contributing to one another's experiences and their ways of thinking and the way that they investigate the world. Mostly. That's true for a lot of schools. Obviously, there are specialized programs. There's engineering schools, and maybe it's just about engineering for that school, or but broadly, the American education system is kind of predicated on this idea of deep learning in the humanities as a foundation and then specializing on top, which is why we had this like four-year bachelor program, which is different from the UK model where you take like a foundation year and then you go directly into your major. So again, that's the general ethos of American education. And that can be confusing for students because, you know, the first thing that a lot of our students will say is, I haven't decided on our major yet. And I'm like, yeah, you and pretty much everybody else. I think the statistic is that like 80% of students will change their major at one point, either because they come in with a major and decide something else. I'm a good example of that. I thought I was going to study religious studies and I didn't even know my major existed. My major, comparative studies in race and ethnicity, was not something that I even knew existed. And I think that's pretty common. You know, most big universities will have upwards of 40, 50, sometimes as many as 70 different major areas of study, most of which students have never heard of before, you know. Even within a program like economics or computer science, there are concentrations. You know, there are programs that have 5 different economics majors or 4 or 5 different computer science subspecialties. So that can feel pretty overwhelming for students, particularly if you're an international student and you don't have access to good guidance, or you don't have a high school guidance counselor who's deeply familiar with the American education program or system. That can feel like, where do I even start? Timeline, personal goals, personal purpose is going to be really, really helpful in helping focus and orient students to, how do I make the best use of my time? And what is step one? What's the first step that I take? Not climbing the whole mountain all at once, but like, you know, one step after another. It's good when you first, you know, start out to like chart out your trajectory, but like step one, not the whole mountain all at once. So, I mean, I'll pause there. I could talk about this for hours, but.
That's so exciting. And I'm thinking, in this new world where we know that like the new professions are created all the time, maybe that's the way to go, you know, to get together like different people. And then as they are like studying their first years, the new courses are already created for the professions that are created, you know, and they become like a super kind of two-day specialists in the areas that are, you know, they can. Another thing that I'm so upset about, I look at high schoolers and the amount of work they have to do, just like solving some problem that has, like, they spend days and years of their life working on something that has no practical implication. And I'm like, why can't we let them work on something that is real and iterate and like help? I don't know, if they're design students, why don't we let them make design for some, you know, there's so many companies and individuals that have awful design, and they would really, you know, could use like a person who is already passionate about it. Maybe they're not amazing professionals, but they can do it like for free or for little, you know, kind of payment compensation, but then they learn so much. There's like a value for these people, and I don't know why we haven't yet figured it out. I don't know why like we waste so much precious time of these young minds and hearts doing things that have no, you know, no value actually per se.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I'll offer potentially a not optimistic analysis of why that is. And I think that is because the idea of the degree has been commodified to an extent. There's an economic incentive to keep students in the university for as long as possible, in part because the prestige of a degree, the prestige of a bachelor's, and particularly the prestige of certain university degrees, doesn't focus on the educational value. The learning experience, the growth, the skill development is secondary or tertiary in some cases at best to the consumption of it, to the the market mediated product of the thing. So that's a little bit of a cynical view.
Yeah, but like then we see a lot of language school who say, oh, to learn a foreign language, yeah, it's a long process, it's complicated, and they would teach and teach until the students are able to pay. They will be teaching you, because there's not, you know, even with my like native language with Russian, like, can I say that I've mastered Russian? If, you know, no, like if you like sit me to write a press release, I would be like, oh my goodness, like, you know, I wish I could do it better. And the same way I'm sure you guys feel about English. So but at the same time, you know, we twisted it completely like around, and we decided we'll be using OKRs, you know, this like goal setting things that tech companies use with every student, you know, really making it specific, measurable, so that we are responsible for this concrete result that we are achieving, and we know exactly what we're doing. And that's much more like project based and much more applicable to real life than just saying, oh, let's learn now first 5,000 words and then 10,000 words and then another 30,000 years, and this can go on forever.
Right.
Yeah? So and I think when we realize that like these are the way things are, but like, is this the best way to do things? Like honest answer is no. And then the question is like, what can we do to disruptive in the best meaning of this word? That's not like disrupt to destroy, but disrupt to make it more efficient and better.
Yeah, I think humans often feel protective of the thing that they're already doing and that they've invested a lot of time in. You go to any university and, you know, any university president or board, and you're like, hey, you're not doing it as well as it could be done. They would, you know, get super defensive. And we see that, you know, across the world in education systems where the bureaucratic functions are really entrenched. I think that's part of the sociological dynamic of institutions.
Yeah. Now, my question to you was like, if you were to, you know, like with a magic wand, like change 3 things about the way the education system works right now, like what would you change?
Well, I think number 1 in the United States is public education funding. We have a really our model of public education is pretty funky because public schools are paid through like taxes that are tied to municipal areas. So poorer areas have poorer performing schools, and we don't have a broad-based commitment to making sure that every student in the United States has access to excellent quality in education. We just don't have that commitment. So that's the number 1 thing that I would change, is public education funding has to be rethought of as valuable as military spending, as valuable as any kind of economic priority. And that's a big issue. I think number 2 would be related to that is lowering the cost of university education. American education, even by the public model, is prohibitively expensive. I mean, for private schools, the total cost of attendance in many cases is upwards of $70,000 a year. That either saddles students with profound debt and means that their decision-making process disincentivizes them from exploring something that actually is related to interest, value, or passion, and is focused exclusively on pragmatics and being able to pay off that debt. I think that undermines the ability for them to make a decision about what would really serve their growth and potentially serve human society. So that's number 2, is making collegiate education free or accessible. And then number 3 is, let me pick a good one.
There's so many.
Yeah. I think the third one maybe would be to have the paradigm of education not be so output focused, but to have rubrics that are experiential and can capture experience. I mean, I think about universities, you know, a lot of people ask me the difference between a liberal arts college and a university. And the thing that I go back to is that universities often prioritize research. You know, the way that professors maintain their positions is publishing. And the way you publish is through, even if it's not good, frankly, right? Putting stuff out is the way that you maintain position, is the way that you bring in research dollars. And so the incentive to tie your job always to research and output, I think disincentivizes teaching sometimes, at least at the university level. Now, I think that's potentially a point that some people might challenge me on, or a controversial idea. Liberal arts colleges, by contrast, are almost exclusively dedicated to undergraduate education, and very oftentimes will be discussion focused and small classes. And so one might say, okay, well, just pick the thing that you want. Go to a university if you want to do research, and go to a liberal arts college if you want more of a personal or intimate educational experience. But I do think that, like, culturally speaking, not focusing so much exclusively on output. I mean, we talk about standardized test scores as, you know, for state leaving examinations, and all of the research says none of those work very well. You know, but it's the thing that state education boards have decided is the way that they can hold teachers accountable, as opposed to like paying them more. I don't know. It just seems very backward to me that the way that you assess quality is not through resources that are made available, but through output of like a very inflexible standardized testing system. I don't know. And then maybe abolishing the College Board would be great. That's my note.
Can you please abolish the College Board? I don't understand why that monopoly is allowed to exist in this country. I remember thinking it when I was in high school, thinking it when I was in college. Like, why do I have to pay so much money to this one institution to learn how to take their test,
Who holds
pay
the keys?
to take their test, and pay to take their classes, to take their other tests, and then I have to pay them to send those scores that they made me take the test for to all the schools that I'm paying to apply to, just so I can hopefully pay that school to let me get in. That's a lot of paying money to one institution.
To one institution. Yep.
I don't get it.
Good thing that I think with anything that feels like this, there's very little time left for it to exist, because we see like constant disruptions, I think, now in all of the areas, like slowly but surely, like things that don't make sense, they cease to exist because just it doesn't make sense. So I think it's coming. Like what you guys described, we don't have this system like in Russia, for example. Yeah, but it sounds like this is not something that like will last for a long time. It just sounds ridiculous.
One hopes.
Yeah.
I would say too that this idea of like a holistic sense of education and like growing the entire person and not just whatever they think they want to study, it's something that we share. And Luke, just before I don't want to take up too much of your time today, but I would love to talk a little bit about how that conversation starts with you specifically when you're helping students write essays, when they're thinking about themselves sort of as the kind of person they want to be when they apply to school, instead of just what is the essay that I have to write so that they'll let me in.
Yeah.
That process is.
Totally. So before we even talk about essays, we have a process that we bring students through, and we do something called a content map. And a content map is a process where you just kind of take a big step back and you look at all of the factors of a person's life, their experiences, their influences, their values, their characteristics, their beliefs. We have like a very, very long list, and we just listen. We say, tell me about this. If someone was going to get to know you and you were going to say these things, you can't know me unless these things are present, right? These things are articulated somewhere. And then we just listen and we just like take notes for like a couple of hours as they talk, and we add, you know, kind of course, like guiding questions. And we end up with this like pretty long document that is basically discovery based, where the idea is like, it's a map that you could visualize, and maybe not all of that actually ends up in your college application, but maybe you can say, cool, this is the circle that I'm going to draw around. These are the things that I know I'm going to prioritize that will complement the SAT scores, the transcript, the letters of recommendation, all the things on paper that are a part of my application. These are the things that I can control the narrative of, and these are the things that I want to explore. We haven't even written an essay at that point or outlined an essay at that point. Then we can say, okay, great. Well, let's look at some essays in the past. So then we look at essays from past students and we do an analysis of them, and we have a process that's pretty simple. We look at content structure and style, and we say like, what's happening in this essay? Not even do you like it or do you not like it, but just tell me about like what's happening. How do you understand over the course of this essay? How does it begin? How does it end? What strategic decisions are they making? How do they make their point? And what choices are they making line by line? One of the places that I nerd out in essays is that essays are a bunch of words, individual words that are strung together over the course of time, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and every single word, every single sentence has a purpose. And by the time you go through draft 1 through however many it is, you have chosen each one of those words, each one of those sentences intentionally. Now that sounds a little bit crazy when I talk about it that way, but when you're editing, you know, piecemeal over the course of many, many weeks, you inevitably do look at every word, you do look at every sentence, you do look at every paragraph, and you understand its purpose and its function. So before we even kind of get into the essay writing process with students, we want them to have an experience of what is the purpose of an essay, what role does it play, what role can it play? Not that there is, and we give them a broad range of example essays to say, look at how differently students approach this experience. There's no one right answer. You can see like this style and this style could not be more different from one another. And yet I get a clear sense of some things about this student here, a clear sense of some things about this student here. And then we can imagine that those things are contextualized by letters of recommendations, grades, SAC scores that give personality, that give dimension to those additional scores. And so that gives a sense of possibility, I think, of course, these are like final polished products, and we say like, you know, it's the process, not the destination. Perfection is at the end, not at the beginning. And then we go through the essay writing process, which, you know, there's tools, there's techniques, there's steps that you can go through. But part of it is being present and meeting where the student is at. You know, some students feel really confident and really, they love words, and some students are terrified of writing. And there's ways to address each student depending on like where they're at. Yeah, so that's, I don't know if that answered your question.
Great answer.
Oh,
Thank you.
that's a great, yeah, that's a great, and it's so funny because we do the same thing with basically with our students and with our teachers. Like I always start with we do it in a mind map. Like I made, because I don't know if you heard about teal organizations. These are like the new kind of organizations that emerge now, where it's very horizontal and everyone is like passionate and do what they love, etc. So
are they named after Peter Thiel, like Peter Thiel organization?
This one is a good one, yeah, but it's it's called after it's
Colored.
Color. Yeah. It's just
okay.
Color, and it's Frederic Laloux. Yeah, it's a French wonderful person. I'll send you the
Cool.
thing. Yeah, but we also start with just like this, making this mind map where we kind of brainstorm and talk about everything that we potentially could do together that can be great, and you know, realistic and unrealistic and like anything. And then out of this, you say, okay, like let's figure out what are the most impactful thing, or like the things that we want to focus on. And then from there, we already like decide on like what is our next step then. But like really looking at this picture, and I think it's so beautiful that you are doing it with students, you know, and you see the big picture for them, because like we were saying, you know, it's so beautiful to introduce this universe of opportunities. And in order to kind of suggest the best options, you really need to deeply know who the person is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Luke, one more question before we say goodbye. Thank you again so much for your time today. And anybody who's tuning in live and wants to send a question through the chat, you're welcome to. But I had one more question just for our students in particular. Any like best practices or words of advice, or even words of calming for people who are writing admissions essays in a second language?
Yeah, I think looking at references is going to be useful, but not just one reference. Look at many, many, many different references, because I think it's easy to feel like there is an answer that I should do, and I just need to find that answer, and then that will take the stress off. And I think actually you want to look at what are the tools that I might borrow? What are the tools the strategies that students have used that I might draw inspiration from, rather than there is an essay that I need to write and I just need to write that essay, because that line of thinking leads to the generic, it leads to the cliche, and it divorces you from the personal, rather than these are the tools that speak to the things that I'm trying to communicate that can help me elevate and clarify that I think opens up possibility rather than closes it down. And the other thing, the most important thing is take your time. Yeah, excellent essays are not written in 2-3 weeks. They're written over time. You take breaks, you come up with a different perspective, you move paragraphs around, you make multiple drafts, you have different iterations going, you stay organized to make sure that, like, if you have questions about things, you're like having a little notes section down here to think, and when you feel yourself getting stuck, you take a break. There's no rush. Structure will help you make sure that today I'm working on content, today I'm working on phrasing, today I'm working on developing ideas, today I'm working on whatever it happens to be. So really chunk down the tasks that there are to do with the writing. And then the final thing that I'll say is just be really mindful about asking for feedback. When you ask for feedback, be really clear about who you're asking feedback from and what the feedback is that you're looking for. I always say never give your essay to people and just say, do you like it or what do you think? That's not useful. It puts them in an awkward position, and it inevitably will get you a mixed bag of feedback. You'll have 5 people who love it and 5 people who think it's trash, and that puts you in a really awkward position. And always ask for feedback. If you're going to ask for feedback, keep it narrow, and don't ask for it when you're done with your essay. Don't be like, I'm done with my essay, what do you think? Because you're done with your essay when you've decided that there's no more working on it, right? When you're done working on it. So ask for feedback at periods when that feedback will be most useful for you, when you're actually willing to be like, oh, that's a useful point for me to consider, let me go and implement it or not. So yeah, that would be my blitz of advice.
Beautiful, Luke. We'll be happy to be sending our students your guys' way. Could you talk a little bit about the process? Like, do you have individual teachers working with international students? And
totally, yeah. So we use a team-based model. It depends on whether we're doing SAT prep or tutoring or admissions coaching. The website is just sparkprep.com, and the email is info@sparkprep.com. But yeah, we use a team-based model, and it depends kind of on what program the students are working with. But we have what's called a student experience coordinator, and that coordinator is the person who's like liaising between the student and the tutors and the family to make sure that communication is all really transparent. And then kind of it depends a little bit on like time zones and availability, but yeah.
Awesome. Luke, thank you so much. This was an excellent talk. You were a wealth of knowledge, and I loved watching your peaceful mountain backdrop for the last hour.
I'm so glad. It was so lovely to speak with all of you. Thank you. And I hope you're all staying well and healthy and indoors.
Yes, wash your hands, everyone. Thank you, Global Neighborhood, and Luke, thank you again. See you soon, everybody.
See you soon.
Yeah, thanks. Bye, neighbors.